The announcement came without warning. No leaks, no subtle hints from the palace press office. Just a sudden, thunderous statement from Buckingham Palace that echoed through the corridors of royal tradition and shattered whatever fragile peace still existed between King Charles and his estranged son, Prince Harry. The king had spoken, and his message was crystal clear. Prince Harry must cease using the title Duke of Sussex. Effective immediately. But that wasn't the part that left the world speechless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because in the same breath, King Charles named another, James Alexander Philip, the young son of Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, as the rightful heir to the Sussex title. Now imagine, for just a second, what that means. The title that once symbolized Harry's pride, his identity, his royal legacy, suddenly reassigned. The king's voice on live broadcast, stern and composed, delivering what many have described as both a warning and a decree. How did it come to this? How did the once celebrated Duke of Sussex, the bright, rebellious son of Diana, reach a point where his own father would publicly strip him of his royal title and hand it to another branch of the family? And more importantly, why now? The cracks had been visible for years. The Oprah interview, the Netflix documentaries, the tell-all memoirs, and the endless headlines painting Harry and Meghan as outsiders to the royal fold. But never, not even in the worst of scandals, had King Charles gone this far. A public address targeting his son by name, invoking royal law and heritage, warning him to cease using what no longer belongs to him. It was a royal earthquake, and beneath that calm, regal tone, there was something unmistakably personal, a father's disappointment disguised as constitutional duty. But what triggered this? Those who know Charles well say it wasn't just about protocol. It was about something deeper, older, something buried in royal history and resurrected in recent months. The House of Windsor, for all its glittering crowns and photo-perfect smiles, has long operated on a set of unwritten rules: loyalty above all else, silence before scandal, and duty before desire. Harry had violated each of them. But it was his continued use of the Duke of Sussex title in connection with his US-based projects that allegedly crossed a line. According to insiders, the king had been advised that Harry's branding and public ventures, including charity partnerships, podcast deals, and production credits, used the Sussex name in ways that blurred the line between royal heritage and private enterprise. In short, he was profiting from his title. And for King Charles, that was the unforgivable sin. But there's a twist, one that no one saw coming. Because while the world focused on the king's warning to his son, very few noticed the second half of the statement, a quiet but monumental declaration that the title Duke of Sussex, in accordance with royal succession laws, would now rest upon the shoulders of James Alexander Philip, a descendant of royal lineage deemed more suited to uphold the dignity of the title. James Alexander Philip, a name many outside royal circles had barely heard before that day. The young son of Prince Edward, King Charles's youngest brother. A quiet, respectful boy, rarely in the tabloids, never in the headlines. Suddenly thrust into the center of one of the most explosive royal controversies of the decade. What was going on behind those palace walls? People who had long worked inside the royal household began whispering. This wasn't just a decision made overnight. It was the result of weeks, maybe months, of private meetings, sealed letters, and a crisis of image management unlike any the monarchy had faced in decades. Royal aides described the mood inside Buckingham Palace as tense and electric. The king, they said, had been unusually withdrawn for weeks, spending hours in private with his advisors and legal team. Meghan Markle's latest public statements about redefining the Sussex legacy were said to have angered him deeply. In private, Charles reportedly confided to a close friend, "There can be no Sussex legacy built outside the monarchy." Then came the order, quietly at first, then publicly. But to understand the weight of this moment, you have to go back to 2018, the day Queen Elizabeth II bestowed the Duke of Sussex title upon her grandson, Prince Harry, as a wedding gift. It was a moment of pride, not only for Harry but for the monarchy itself, a symbol of continuity, tradition, and hope for the next generation. In her quiet, regal way, the Queen was signaling her confidence in Harry's future role. Few could have predicted that 6 years later, that same title would become a point of royal contention, or that another young man from the same bloodline would one day be declared its rightful holder. So what changed? The answer, many believe, lies in King Charles's mission to slim down the monarchy, a plan that began long before he ascended the throne. Charles has always envisioned a more modern, streamlined royal family, one that's smaller, more efficient, less scandal-prone. But what he never expected was for his own son to become the face of the very chaos he sought to eliminate. In recent years, Harry's public image had shifted from royal rebel to celebrity exile. Every interview, every podcast, every memoir seemed to further widen the chasm between him and his family. Still, Charles remained silent until now. Why break that silence now, in such a public and confrontational way? Sources close to the palace say there were concerns that Harry's use of the title Duke of Sussex on legal documents, charitable foundations, and business contracts in the United States could create confusion about his status, even raise legal issues concerning royal endorsement and representation. A senior advisor reportedly told the king, "If you don't act now, the title becomes a brand, not a birthright." That was the breaking point. Within days, private letters were exchanged between Buckingham Palace and Royal Legal Council. Drafts were circulated, revised, and sealed again under heavy security. What emerged from those meetings was something the king had hoped he'd never have to do: publicly distance the crown from his own son. When the time came, Charles didn't delegate the message to the palace press office or a spokesperson. He did it himself, on camera, as monarch. The address began with an almost eerie calm. The king's voice, steady yet strained, carried the weight of both authority and heartbreak. He spoke of responsibility, of the sanctity of royal lineage, and of preserving the honor of the crown. Then came the part that stunned the nation. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is hereby instructed to cease use of the title, effective immediately. The title shall henceforth be recognized in connection with James Alexander Philip, son of Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh. It was a royal thunderbolt. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first time a monarch had revoked a title. In royal history, titles have been stripped, reassigned, even erased from records when deemed necessary. King George V removed several Germanic titles during World War I. Queen Elizabeth quietly retracted certain peerages tied to disgraced relatives. But this was different. This was personal. For a father to publicly address his son, not in private, not through quiet counsel, but in front of the world, was a move that carried not just royal precedent, but emotional devastation. As the statement ended, the king's eyes shifted downward for just a moment. Some say it was a break in his composure. Others say it was guilt. Either way, the damage was done. Within minutes, news networks across the world lit up with breaking headlines. King Charles strips Prince Harry of Duke title, royal reassignment shocks Britain, new Duke of Sussex named. And then came the backlash. Royal watchers took to social media, divided in their responses. Some supported the king's decision, arguing that Harry had long abandoned his duties and no longer deserved royal privileges. Others saw it as a cruel, unnecessary humiliation, a father's vengeance disguised as policy. Meghan Markle's team reportedly went into immediate crisis mode, calling emergency PR meetings and drafting statements that were ultimately never released. Meanwhile, Prince Edward and Sophie, caught completely off guard, reportedly tried to shield their son James from the sudden attention. Friends close to the family said the young man was bewildered by the entire ordeal, aware that his life had just changed forever without his consent. But deep inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was far from calm. According to one senior aide, this announcement was merely the first move in a larger restructuring. There were whispers that the king planned to review other titles, including those of minor royals whose activities had blurred the lines between public service and private enterprise. And yet, one question lingered in every corner of the media, from London to Los Angeles. Why James? Why would King Charles transfer the Duke of Sussex title to the son of Prince Edward, bypassing other royal descendants? The answer, according to one insider, lies in the king's trust, or rather, his lack of it. James, quiet, respectful, and untouched by scandal, represented the kind of royal Charles wanted the public to see. Dutiful, discreet, and loyal. Harry, on the other hand, had become unpredictable. In Charles's mind, the Sussex name needed saving, and James Alexander Philip was the perfect vessel to restore its dignity. But there's something no one is talking about, a secret set of royal papers that could explain everything. Documents said to have been drafted during Queen Elizabeth's reign, detailing alternative lines of succession for peerages in the event of public scandal or abdication of duty. Insiders say these papers were recently revisited, and perhaps even signed off by King Charles himself. Could it be that the late Queen foresaw this? That she left behind contingency plans for precisely this kind of royal crisis? If that's true, then this isn't just a matter of family conflict. It's a carefully executed royal maneuver years in the making. But here's the chilling part. This announcement might not be the end of the story. It might be the beginning of something much bigger, a deeper cleansing of royal ranks, a tightening of lineage, a reminder that in the world of crowns and bloodlines, even a son of Diana isn't beyond correction. And as cameras zoomed in on King Charles's face during his final words, the look in his eyes told a story that no script could capture, a mixture of sorrow, duty, and cold resolve. Was this justice for the monarchy or revenge for betrayal? Whatever it was, the message was clear. The age of leniency was over. The king had drawn the line. But what Harry did next would push that line even further and set off a chain of royal events that no one in Britain saw coming. Because just hours after the announcement, while royal staff scrambled to control the narrative, something unexpected arrived at Buckingham Palace. A confidential note from Montecito. And the contents of that note would ignite a new wave of royal chaos. One that would reach back decades and expose truths the palace had spent years trying to bury. And this is where our story truly begins. It began on a Thursday morning, the kind that seemed calm on the surface but carried a strange heaviness in the air, like the moment before a storm rolls in. Buckingham Palace, the beating heart of royal order and secrecy, was unusually quiet. Staffers who usually moved briskly through marble corridors slowed their pace, whispering only when necessary. The echo of polished shoes on the floor seemed louder than usual, every sound bouncing off centuries of royal tension. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. At 8:47 a.m., the palace press office sent out a brief, cryptic message to media outlets. His Majesty the King will address the nation at noon. No topic, no details, just that single line. It was enough to send a shiver through every newsroom in Britain. Kings don't just speak publicly without reason, not in the age of media strategy and rehearsed optics. When they do, it's because something irreversible is about to unfold. Reporters rushed to the palace gates. Cameramen scrambled for positions. Within minutes, the BBC, Sky News, CNN, and every major outlet had cut into their morning schedules. The palace balcony, the marble steps, the grand archway. Every inch became a stage, waiting for the monarch's voice. But inside, there was still silence. Royal attendants were told to stand by. Curtains were drawn in certain rooms, lights dimmed in others. The king's personal secretary, Sir Clive Mendham, was seen walking hurriedly toward the study carrying a sealed folder marked in gold. Address draft, final. Even senior staff weren't told the contents. It was said that only 5 people knew what the king was about to announce. And yet, despite the secrecy, one detail had already begun to spread like wildfire among insiders. This wasn't about foreign affairs, not about charity, not even about the environment. It was about family. One palace guard reportedly murmured to another, "It's about the Duke. He's finally doing it." By mid-morning, word had reached Windsor Castle and Clarence House. Queen Camilla was said to be calm but distant. Her schedule cleared for the day. Prince William, in Windsor, canceled a private meeting. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, reportedly looked pale when she received a message from her husband, Prince Edward. Edward's text, according to one insider, was short but heavy. "It concerns James." Imagine that. A father learning from a single line that his young son, barely out of the shadows of royal anonymity, was suddenly part of something monumental. He didn't ask for this. He wasn't prepared for it. But the machinery of monarchy doesn't pause for feelings. Outside, the crowd grew. Tourists clutched their phones, whispering theories. Some thought it might be health-related, others speculated about a royal scandal. But among the press corps, A quiet consensus formed. This would be about Prince Harry. Too many hints, too many recent rumblings from within the palace about misrepresentation and royal identity misuse. The tension was so thick you could almost taste it. At 11:53 a.m., the palace bell rang 3 times, an old signal, dating back to the Victorian era, used to mark important announcements. Footmen took their positions. Aides lined up along the hall leading to the broadcast room. Inside, King Charles sat at his antique desk, hands clasped tightly around a stack of papers. His eyes were fixed on the portrait of Queen Elizabeth that hung behind the camera. He looked tired, perhaps even haunted. The production crew adjusted the microphone, tested the lighting, and gave him a final nod. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The weight of what he was about to say carried its own gravity. At precisely noon, the royal crest appeared on every major UK television channel. The announcer's voice echoed through living rooms. "We now bring you an address from His Majesty King Charles III." And then he appeared. The first few seconds were eerily still. He began with the usual courtesy, "My beloved citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth." But his tone was different. Not ceremonial, not celebratory. It was resolute, almost mournful. He spoke of duty, of lineage, of the sacred bond between title and responsibility. The words were chosen carefully, each syllable striking like a drumbeat. And then, without warning, he said it. There has been confusion in recent years regarding the rightful representation of certain royal titles, most notably that of the Dukedom of Sussex. As sovereign, it is my duty to ensure that our titles are held in the spirit of service, not self-interest. Therefore, it is with deep consideration that I declare the Dukedom of Sussex to rest henceforth in the lineage of my brother, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, and in his son, James Alexander Philip. The world stopped. For the first time in modern royal history, a reigning monarch had publicly stripped a family member of their title while they were still alive and unconvicted of any legal wrongdoing. The king's face didn't waver, but his eyes flickered, an unmistakable flash of emotion, a father's pain buried beneath a crown's obligation. In California, the news broke mid-morning. Meghan Markle reportedly learned of it through a text before the broadcast even finished. "He did it," it read. She was said to have gone silent for several minutes before whispering to Harry, "They're erasing you." Back in London, the crowd outside the palace reacted in stunned silence. Some gasped, others applauded. A few shouted questions at royal aides leaving the gates, but no answers came. The media scrambled to dissect the speech line by line. Within minutes, social media exploded. Hashtag King Charles, hashtag Duke of Sussex, hashtag Royal Shock were trending worldwide. News outlets replayed the clip on loop. Commentators debated whether this was reform or revenge. But inside the palace, the silence lingered. The king remained seated after the cameras cut off, his fingers pressed to his temples. His chief advisor approached quietly and placed the signed decree on the desk. The title transfer, effective immediately, was to be entered into the official peerage record. The king signed it with one deliberate stroke of his pen. "History will understand," he muttered under his breath. But would Harry? Outside the palace gates, a lone photographer captured the moment the royal flag dipped slightly in the wind, as if bowing to the gravity of what had just happened. A piece of the monarchy's modern history had shifted. Meanwhile, in Montecito, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Every major news outlet wanted a statement from Harry or Meghan, but none came. Not that day. Not yet. Behind closed doors, Harry was reportedly pacing the living room, disbelief etched across his face. "He can't do that. He can't just take it away," he said, over and over. Meghan tried to calm him, but her silence spoke louder than her words. She knew this was only the beginning. And she was right. Because the king's address had set in motion something far more consequential than a title change. It had reawakened old rivalries, reopened royal wounds, and drawn a battle line through the House of Windsor itself. Inside the palace, the staff called it the silent mourning. No one dared raise their voice. No one dared speak the name Harry. But every servant, every attendant, every secretary felt the shift. Something had broken, something that couldn't be easily repaired. Even Prince Edward, a man known for his calm and moderation, sat in quiet disbelief as he watched his son's name echo across the world. "This will change his life," he whispered to Sophie, who nodded but said nothing. The irony, of course, was that James Alexander Philip hadn't asked for any of it. He'd lived quietly, content with a modest role. But now, suddenly, he was the center of a royal storm. A young man becoming a symbol of restoration, of what the monarchy wished to preserve. That evening, as the palace lights dimmed and the reporters packed up, one insider said something chilling. This was just the beginning. There are more titles under review. And deep inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles stood by the window of his private quarters, watching the lights of London flicker against the night sky. Behind him lay the papers, the signature, the decree that had changed royal history. He whispered something softly to himself, too low for anyone to hear, but the look in his eyes said enough. Regret, resolve, and something else, fear. Because even a king knows that when you strike against blood, the consequences never end cleanly. And as the clock ticked past midnight, a courier departed from the palace with a sealed envelope, addressed not to the media, not to Parliament, but to a man thousands of miles away. Prince Harry. Inside that envelope was a message far more personal than anything Charles had said on camera. A message that would soon find its way into the public eye and reignite a royal conflict unlike any before. But before that letter reached California, another event inside the palace would make history. And this time, it wouldn't be the king holding the pen. Because at Windsor, someone else was already preparing to speak. And what they had to say would unravel everything. What is a title, really? A few ornate words stitched on a parchment? A symbol of history? Or a trap built of expectation? For most of us, a name is personal. It's what we answer to, what shapes how we see ourselves. But in the royal family, a name isn't earned, it's inherited. And with that inheritance comes an invisible crown of responsibility that can either elevate you or crush you. For Prince Harry, the title Duke of Sussex had once been a badge of pride. It was a moment of triumph on his wedding day, bestowed by his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, as a mark of love and confidence. The cheering crowds outside Windsor Castle, the millions watching across the globe, the royal balcony kiss, all wrapped neatly under that single name, the Duke of Sussex. But as the years passed, that same name began to feel like an anchor. It tied him to a world he was trying to escape and reminded him of the one thing he could never outrun, his bloodline. When the Queen gave him that title, it was supposed to represent a new chapter, a union of old and new, of tradition and modernity. Sussex wasn't just a title, it was a statement. The last Duke of Sussex before Harry was Prince Augustus Frederick, a man infamous in royal history for rebelling against royal marriage laws and defying expectations. Perhaps the Queen saw a bit of that rebellious spark in Harry, hoping he'd channel it with grace. Instead, he became the embodiment of royal rebellion in the digital age. But before we get to the moment it all unraveled, let's rewind to what that title truly meant. In the hierarchy of British nobility, dukedoms are among the highest ranks, a direct reflection of royal favor. The title Duke of Sussex placed Harry among a select few who carried both modern influence and ancient authority. It gave him precedence, funding, and the automatic reverence of protocol. Doors opened for him that others could only dream of. Invitations arrived by default. His name, when attached to an event, brought prestige. Yet behind those privileges lurked a pressure few could comprehend. The palace's rulebook dictated everything, from when he could speak to what causes he could represent. Every handshake, every smile, every public word was weighed against centuries of precedent. And Harry, restless by nature, began to suffocate. Even before Meghan entered the picture, there had been moments, small fractures in the royal armor, when he questioned what it all meant. Friends say he often joked, "If I weren't a prince, maybe I'd finally be myself." But every time he tried to carve out independence, the palace gently reminded him that the crown doesn't negotiate with individuality. Then Meghan came, confident, outspoken, unfiltered. To the royal institution, she was both a breath of fresh air and a gust of chaos. To Harry, she was freedom. Together, they thought they could redefine what royalty meant in the modern world. Two people determined to modernize the monarchy from within. But titles are tricky things. You can't modernize what's built to preserve. The Sussex brand became their bridge to the world beyond palace walls. From charity foundations to media ventures, it became the symbol of their identity after stepping back from royal duties. Sussex meant recognition, connection, legacy. But it also meant dependence, because without the royal association, the name lost its power. This is where things grew complicated. When Harry and Meghan left for North America in 2020, the palace didn't revoke their titles immediately. It was a gesture of restraint, one that Charles and the Queen believed would preserve a semblance of dignity. Let them build a life, the Queen reportedly said, but remind them of what they left behind. And they did build a life, lavish homes, high-profile deals, a global media presence. But with every appearance, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex branding followed. Charity partnerships used it. Netflix credits included it. Even event bookings labeled them as such. To the royal establishment, this blurred the line between public service and private profit. To Harry, it was simply who he was. "Why should I stop being who I am?" he once said in an interview. "It's not just a title. It's part of my story." But to the monarchy, titles don't belong to people. They belong to the crown. And the crown, in its timeless logic, decided it was time to reclaim what it had once given. Here's the irony. The Duke of Sussex title itself was once controversial. The original Duke, Augustus Frederick, had defied royal convention by marrying a woman deemed unsuitable. His marriage was annulled by law, and his children were declared illegitimate. Sound familiar? The echoes between that history and Harry's story are uncanny. Both men loved on their own terms, both clashed with the establishment, both paid the price for it. It's as if history was doomed to repeat itself. As whispers spread that the king was considering action, royal historians began drawing parallels to 1936, the year King Edward VIII abdicated the throne for love. That abdication nearly destroyed the monarchy, forcing the royal family to rewrite the rules of duty versus desire. And now, nearly a century later, King Charles faced a similar dilemma: protect the institution or protect his son. He chose the institution. Inside the palace, the debate was fierce. Some advisors urged restraint. Stripping Harry's title will look cruel, one warned. Others, including constitutional experts, insisted it was necessary. If we don't act now, every title becomes negotiable, they argued. The king's heart reportedly wrestled with the decision. He was a father before he was a monarch, but the weight of the crown left little room for mercy. When the final draft of his statement crossed his desk, he read it 3 times before signing. But what no one realized then was that another name, James Alexander Philip, had already been quietly inserted into royal paperwork weeks earlier. James, the teenage son of Prince Edward and Sophie, had been raised far from the glare of publicity. He was known for his modesty, his respect for tradition, and his quiet sense of duty. Where Harry had sought freedom, James had embraced restraint. He represented what the monarchy wanted the next generation to be: stable, predictable, loyal. In that sense, the king's decision wasn't just punishment, it was symbolic correction, a resetting of the royal compass. Still, to the public, it felt brutal. The contrast between Harry and James became instant tabloid fodder. "The Lost Prince versus the Chosen Heir," screamed one headline. Another read, "The Crown's New Favorite Son." Analysts debated the ethics of reassigning a living royal's title. Legal scholars weighed in on constitutional precedent. And social media did what it does best: turn it into a global argument about justice, power, and forgiveness. But beyond the noise, something deeper was happening. The idea of what it means to be royal was being rewritten in real time. For centuries, the monarchy had relied on mystique, titles that commanded respect simply by existing. But in the age of streaming platforms and celebrity culture, that mystique was fading. People no longer bowed to bloodlines. They followed personalities. Harry and Meghan had capitalized on that shift brilliantly, building influence independent of royal duty. Yet that same independence became their undoing. In the eyes of the palace, they had turned nobility into a brand. And the king was determined to end that era before it consumed what was left of royal integrity. When Charles spoke the words, "The title shall rest henceforth upon the lineage of my brother," it wasn't just a correction, it was a warning to every royal descendant watching. The monarchy, in his reign, would not tolerate blurred lines. But let's pause for a moment and ask the uncomfortable question: was it fair? Harry had been born into a system that demanded obedience but gave no true escape. Every path he chose, whether service, marriage, or exile, was judged against impossible expectations. He wasn't rebelling against duty. He was rebelling against invisibility. The title was the last thread connecting him to a family that had already shut him out. Taking it away wasn't just political, it was personal. Imagine watching your father, the king, strip away the last piece of identity linking you to your mother's legacy. Imagine seeing your family name rebranded and given to someone else, all under the banner of duty. It wasn't just public shame, it was existential erasure. And yet, from the king's perspective, it had to be done. The royal brand was bleeding. Scandal fatigue had set in. Trust needed restoring. Someone had to pay the price. But the king wasn't ready for what came next. Because while the title may have been taken, Harry still had something far more dangerous, his voice. And he was about to use it in ways that would shake the monarchy to its foundations. In the days following the announcement, news broke that Harry's team was preparing a response. Not a statement, not a denial, but a documentary. One that promised to reveal the truth behind the royal system and the politics of power within the crown. The king's advisors panicked. "He's going to make this worse," one aide said. "He'll turn sympathy into spectacle." Meanwhile, Prince Edward found himself in an impossible position. His son's life had changed overnight. The world now saw James as the new face of Sussex, a title he hadn't asked for, a weight he hadn't earned. Edward reportedly begged the king for time, asking him to delay the official registry update. The king refused. "The matter is settled," he said. And so, within the pages of the Royal Gazette, the change became official. One line, cold and final. The Dukedom of Sussex, henceforth associated with the lineage of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. It was done. But as the ink dried, one royal historian made an observation that caught the world's attention. "Every title has a soul," he said. "And when you take it from someone who still lives, that soul doesn't disappear. It haunts." Haunting, indeed. Because while the world debated law and protocol, no one noticed what was happening behind palace doors. A letter, sealed in royal insignia, had been sent to Windsor for review. A document rumored to reference a secret clause in Queen Elizabeth's will. One that could either justify the king's decision or condemn it entirely. That letter was about to resurface. And when it did, it would expose a hidden plan that stretched back years before Harry's fall. But before that revelation, one unexpected figure would step forward. A man whose loyalty to the late Queen was absolute, and whose memory could unravel everything King Charles had just done. And his testimony would prove that the story of the Duke of Sussex was far from over. He was the royal no one talked about. The quiet boy who never made front-page headlines, never courted attention, never caused scandal. For years, his name barely surfaced in public discussions about the monarchy. But now, overnight, James Alexander Philip had become the most discussed young man in Britain. The boy who once blended into the background was suddenly branded the new Duke of Sussex, a title that once belonged to the world's most controversial prince. It was as if the monarchy had pulled a name from the shadows and thrust it under the brightest spotlight imaginable. But who was he really? And why did King Charles choose him? The answer, as it turns out, lies in a web of royal foresight, quiet grooming, and a decades-old plan buried deep within Buckingham Palace. James Alexander Philip was born in 2007 to Prince Edward and Sophie, Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. From the very beginning, his parents took a markedly different approach to raising their children. While most royal offspring were born into ceremony and public exposure, Edward and Sophie shielded their family from the limelight. They lived primarily at Bagshot Park, a countryside estate tucked away from the chaos of London. Their children, Lady Louise and James, were given as close to an ordinary life as possible. James was different from his royal cousins in ways subtle but profound. Where George, Charlotte, and Louis were trained early for royal appearances, James spent his childhood walking his dogs in the woods, attending local events quietly, and being taught the value of humility. He wasn't educated in royal privilege. He was raised in royal restraint. From an early age, he showed the kind of discipline and composure that palace insiders called Old Windsor spirit. He was polite to a fault, introverted, intelligent, and precise. One palace aide once said, "James is the kind of young man the monarchy used to build itself on. Quiet, dutiful, loyal." That loyalty didn't go unnoticed. When King Charles ascended the throne, he began re-evaluating the future of the royal line. His vision was clear: a smaller, more focused monarchy built on stability rather than spectacle. He admired Edward and Sophie for their discretion, the way they had raised their children without controversy or entitlement. They understand duty, Charles once remarked privately. They never mistake privilege for purpose. In contrast, Harry had become unpredictable, emotionally charged, outspoken, often in direct defiance of royal policy. He had once embodied Diana's compassionate heart, but now represented a version of modern royalty the king couldn't control. So when the discussion of the Sussex title resurfaced, a conversation originally meant to remain sealed, it was James's name that quietly emerged from the folds of old royal contingency plans. These plans weren't new. In fact, their roots traced back to Queen Elizabeth herself. Decades ago, during one of her private council sessions, the late Queen reportedly asked a trusted advisor a peculiar question: what if a title holder turns against the crown? It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. After all, she had lived through the abdication crisis of 1936, when her uncle King Edward VIII chose love over duty and plunged the monarchy into chaos. That wound never truly healed. Her advisors drafted what came to be known informally as the Hereditary Realignment Protocol, a legal contingency that allowed the monarch to reassign or dissolve certain titles if they were used in ways deemed contrary to royal integrity. It was rarely mentioned, almost mythical in royal circles, but it existed. And under that framework, a title could be redirected within the same royal bloodline if justified by public necessity or reputational preservation. Sound familiar? When Charles became king, he quietly ordered a review of those old documents. By that time, Harry's interviews and memoirs had shaken public trust. The monarchy's internal surveys, yes, they conduct those, showed that 48% of Britons viewed the Duke of Sussex title negatively. For a brand that thrived on reverence, that was disastrous. Enter James Alexander Philip. The king saw in him not just a name, but an opportunity for restoration. The young man represented everything the Sussex title used to stand for: dignity, quiet strength, and respect for heritage. More importantly, James was the son of the royal family's most loyal member, Prince Edward, a man who had never once stepped out of line. It was, from the king's perspective, a clean slate. Still, the decision wasn't made lightly. A series of private meetings took place at Sandringham, where the king and his closest advisors discussed the matter. Edward was invited, reluctantly. According to a royal insider, the conversation was somber and heavy. The king explained his reasoning, citing the constitutional need to protect the crown's reputation. Edward reportedly responded, "I understand your position, but my son did not ask for this." To which Charles allegedly replied, "No one ever asks for duty, Edward. We inherit it." It was done. Weeks before the public address, legal documents were quietly prepared by the royal legal secretary. James's name was added under a new succession clause for the Sussex peerage. He would not immediately assume public duties, but the lineage would recognize him as the rightful successor. Still, Edward and Sophie kept it secret from their children, at least until the world found out. When the announcement went public, the family was stunned. Sophie, fiercely protective of her children, was said to have wept. "He's still just a boy," she reportedly told a close friend. James, on the other hand, reacted with the calm that had defined him his whole life. "If this is what's best for grandfather's legacy, I'll accept it," he said quietly, referring to his late grandfather, Prince Philip. It was a moment that revealed everything about who he was. While Harry's response was fiery, emotional, and immediate, James's was stillness. He made no statement, no public appearance, no denial. Instead, he spent that weekend riding horses with his father at Windsor Great Park, avoiding cameras and questions. The tabloids called it the calm before the storm. But there was more brewing behind the scenes than anyone realized. Because while the king's decision was final, it wasn't unanimous. Some members of the royal household opposed it, arguing that assigning the Sussex title to another living relative could create legal complications. One senior advisor warned, "We risk dividing the family line." Another said bluntly, "We're turning a child into a political shield." But the king was unmoved. To him, James symbolized redemption, a chance to reclaim the Sussex legacy from controversy. The monarchy cannot survive on sympathy, Charles told one confidant. It must survive on respect. Respect was something James had in abundance. Growing up, he had been the image of quiet intelligence. Teachers at his private school described him as disciplined but kind. He showed early interest in history and environmental causes, often volunteering for conservation projects under his father's foundation. Unlike his cousins, he never sought attention. He had no social media accounts, no press photos outside official events. And yet, for all his calm, there was a quiet burden beneath it all, a sense that his life had never truly been his own. Royal insiders later revealed that even as a child, James had been aware of the hierarchy of importance within the family. He once told a tutor, "I'm not like the others. I'll only matter if they want me to." That line, haunting in hindsight, perfectly captured what would come next. When the news of his new title broke, global media swarmed Bagshot Park. Paparazzi stationed themselves at the estate gates. Tabloids published grainy photos of him walking his dog, labeling him the reluctant Duke. Royal analysts speculated endlessly. Would he accept it? Would he perform duties? Would he speak? But James said nothing. His silence, however, spoke volumes. It painted him as the antithesis of Harry, the quiet to Harry's noise, the duty to Harry's defiance. The monarchy, deliberately or not, had found its perfect foil, and that's when a curious document resurfaced from the archives, one that tied the two men together in ways no one had expected. Buried in royal correspondence from 2018 was a memorandum written shortly after Harry's wedding. It referenced succession adjustments to the Sussex peerage, drafted as a precaution should the holder of the title act in ways deemed inconsistent with the expectations of the crown. The document bore the signature of Queen Elizabeth herself. It was, in essence, a royal contingency plan. This revelation changed everything. It meant that the idea of replacing Harry as Duke of Sussex wasn't conceived recently. It had been considered from the very start. The monarchy had planned for the possibility of defiance. The Queen, ever the strategist, had foreseen turbulence in her grandson's path. So when Charles executed that clause years later, he wasn't acting impulsively. He was following the blueprint his mother had left behind. But the public didn't see a plan. They saw betrayal. A father ousting his son, a family divided, and a boy caught in the crossfire. In the weeks that followed, rumors swirled that James had written a private letter to Harry, expressing sympathy. No one ever confirmed it, but sources close to both families insisted it was true. The letter reportedly said, "I didn't seek your title, and I would never want it to hurt you. I hope you understand this isn't about us. It's about them." If real, that line revealed something extraordinary. Empathy within a system built on hierarchy. But as touching as that might sound, it didn't stop what came next. Because behind closed doors, Meghan was preparing her next move. Reports emerged that she had contacted legal counsel to review the legitimacy of the king's action under international recognition law. The palace dismissed the idea as nonsense, but the press devoured it. Headlines screamed Sussex versus Palace 2.0. The quiet boy from Bagshot Park was now at the center of a global storm. His life, once protected, was now dissected. His every gesture analyzed. His every expression spun into meaning. And yet, through it all, James remained silent. He didn't attend interviews, didn't issue statements. He let the crown, and the controversy, speak for itself. But beneath that silence, a quiet rebellion was brewing, not from him, but from someone much closer to the king. Someone who knew the full truth of how this decision was made and what it had cost behind the scenes. Because while the world saw the coronation of a new duke, behind palace walls, one royal aide was about to leak something that would shift the story entirely. A file labeled Sussex Transition Documents, Confidential. And inside that file was proof that this title reassignment had been planned long before King Charles took the throne, and that another royal, closer than anyone suspected, had pushed for it all along. That revelation would not only expose the internal power struggles within Buckingham Palace, but also shatter the carefully crafted image of royal unity. Because this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was the monarchy turning on itself. And what came next would make the king's public address look like a prelude to something much darker. Every monarch has a moment when patience turns into resolve, when years of quiet restraint combust into action. For King Charles, that moment didn't arrive suddenly. It built slowly, like a storm gathering over the horizon, whispering warnings long before the first crack of thunder. The seeds of this breaking point were planted years ago, long before his televised address. The tension between duty and family, between the institution and the individual, had been simmering beneath the surface. Charles had always been the patient one, the thinker, the monarch who believed diplomacy could outlast rebellion. But by 2025, patience had failed him. The crown had begun to feel like a cage rather than a calling, and at the heart of that turmoil stood one man, his son, Prince Harry. It wasn't just about titles. It wasn't even about money or media scandals. It was about legacy. Charles had spent his entire life waiting for the throne. Decades in the shadows, mocked by tabloids, scrutinized by the world, and haunted by the ghosts of Diana's legacy. When he finally ascended, he promised himself he would rule differently, firmly, but with compassion. He wanted to heal the royal family, to present a united front to a weary nation. But the moment he became king, that dream began to unravel. Harry's book Spare had reopened wounds Charles thought had healed. Every page was a reminder that fatherhood, for him, had always been overshadowed by monarchy. He never wanted me, Harry had written. He wanted an heir and a spare. Those words cut deeper than any political attack could. They weren't just accusations. They were confessions from a son who had never stopped bleeding. In private, Charles didn't shout. He didn't rage. He did what he had always done. He absorbed it. But those who knew him say the pain was visible. He aged in weeks, one longtime aide recalled. He carried the shame of every word Harry wrote. Still, the king did nothing publicly. Not yet. He understood the modern media game better than people gave him credit for. He knew that reacting emotionally would only feed the narrative. So he waited. And when the Netflix docuseries followed, the one where Harry and Meghan spoke about palace leaks, racist undertones, and emotional neglect, Charles watched every episode alone, in silence. By the final episode, he stood and turned off the television himself. Enough, he reportedly said. I have been patient long enough. From that moment, something in him shifted. He no longer saw the issue as father and son. It was king versus liability. The crown couldn't coexist with a member who used it as a platform for rebellion. You can't represent the monarchy while attacking it, he told Camilla. But even then, he hesitated to act. He feared it would be seen as vindictive, as another father-son tragedy. The press already painted him as cold, and the ghost of Diana's compassion loomed over every decision he made. Then came the final straw. It wasn't a book or an interview. It was a speech. In early 2025, Harry had been invited to speak at a private global summit on philanthropy in Los Angeles. His speech, which was meant to be about veterans' welfare, took an unexpected turn. He spoke about the corrosion of institutions that refuse to evolve and titles that enslave rather than empower. At one point, he said, "Sometimes the truest act of loyalty is to tell the truth, even if it breaks tradition." The crowd applauded, but to the royal family, it was blasphemy. Back in London, the palace communications team went into damage control. Advisors drafted statements urging calm, while others warned that this could spark a constitutional crisis. The king, however, said nothing. He simply walked into his private office, closed the door, and sat alone for almost 2 hours. When he emerged, he asked his secretary for one thing: a copy of the hereditary realignment protocol, the same royal contingency plan his mother had commissioned decades ago. That evening, during dinner with Camilla, he finally broke his silence. "They've turned the title into a trademark," he said, voice steady but cold. "It's not about family anymore. It's about control." Camilla, ever the pragmatist, tried to tread carefully. "Charles, he's your son. If you strip him, they'll call it revenge." Charles stared into his glass. "Let them. I've been the villain my entire life. What's one more story?" That's when his advisors began preparing what would later be known internally as Directive Sussex. It started innocuously, a series of memos outlining the growing misuse of royal branding and public misrepresentation by Harry and Meghan's ventures. Each report cited specific instances where the Duke and Duchess of Sussex title appeared in contexts that could imply royal endorsement. These included production credits, legal filings, and global media appearances. At first, Charles simply wanted clarification. But when the compiled dossier landed on his desk, the evidence shocked him. It wasn't that Harry was breaking the law. It was that he was redefining the monarchy in his own image. To the king, that was intolerable. In a late-night meeting at Clarence House, attended only by senior legal advisors and Sir Clive Mindham, the king made his decision. "We act now," he said. "The monarchy must outlive the noise." From that point, everything moved with ruthless precision. A statement was drafted, sealed, and scheduled for public delivery. Palace staff were instructed to avoid leaks at all costs. Even William wasn't told until 2 days before the broadcast. "You're doing the right thing," William reportedly said. "But once you do it, there's no going back." The night before the announcement, Charles walked the halls of Buckingham Palace alone. It said he stopped in front of a portrait of Diana, the same portrait that used to hang in his private residence at Highgrove. "I never wanted this," he murmured. "But he left me no choice." That was the breaking point. Not anger, not revenge, but resignation. The kind of cold, steady resolve that comes when all other options have failed. In the following hours, he rehearsed his address repeatedly, changing small phrases until the tone struck the right balance of authority and sorrow. His advisors suggested softening the line about transferring the title to James Alexander Philip. "It will sound cruel," one aide warned. Charles shook his head. "It must sound final." And it did. When he finally delivered that speech to the world, it wasn't the trembling voice of an uncertain father. It was the steel of a monarch defending his realm. But what the cameras didn't capture was the moment right after the broadcast, when the king, now alone in his study, removed his glasses and whispered, "I hope he forgives me someday." But forgiveness was the last thing on Harry's mind. Across the ocean, Meghan was already mobilizing. Her PR team saw the address not as an ending, but as a new battlefield. Within hours, U.S. media outlets began running sympathetic op-eds: "A father's betrayal," "The exile of the spare," "The cruelty of Charles." Behind the scenes, Harry's lawyers began reviewing whether the king's declaration could be challenged in court under international recognition law. Charles, however, expected this. He had prepared for the backlash. What he hadn't prepared for was the one person inside his own family who quietly disagreed with him: Prince Edward. Edward, though loyal to the king, was deeply troubled. His son James had become a symbol he never wanted him to be. "He's just a boy," Edward said to the king during a private phone call. "You're putting him in a place that doesn't belong to him." But Charles remained unmoved. "Edward," the title was broken. "I'm restoring it." "And at what cost?" Edward replied. Silence hung on the line for several seconds before the king answered, "The monarchy's survival is never without cost." That exchange, though brief, marked the first true crack in Charles's support system. Even within the royal circle, doubts began to surface. Some courtiers whispered that the king was letting personal emotion cloud his judgment. Others said he was doing what his mother never could, disciplining a wayward son. But the breaking point wasn't only emotional, it was spiritual. Charles had always believed his reign would be one of unity. Yet, now, he had turned the crown into a weapon against his own blood. In the days following the announcement, the king reportedly suffered sleepless nights. He was seen pacing his office at odd hours, reviewing letters from the public. Some praised him for protecting royal dignity. Others accused him of cruelty. He read every one. One letter in particular, written by a British war veteran, reportedly struck him hard. It read, "Your Majesty, I once fought under your son's foundation. We followed him because he made us believe in the crown again. Don't take that away from us." The king didn't reply, but that letter stayed on his desk for weeks. Meanwhile, public opinion fractured further. Royalists hailed the decision as necessary. Critics called it heartless. The monarchy had once again become a mirror of division, reflecting the nation's split between tradition and compassion. And through it all, Charles began to feel the weight of the throne pressing heavier than ever before. His every breath now echoed the unspoken truth of monarchy, that to preserve the institution, one must sometimes sacrifice the person. Yet deep down, even he knew this wasn't over. Because days after the broadcast, one of his aides entered the king's study with a pale face and trembling hands. "Your Majesty," the aide said, "something's been leaked." The king's head lifted slowly. "What is it?" The aide hesitated, then whispered, "The draft letter to the Prime Minister and the one to Prince Harry. They're out." For the first time, every monarch has a moment when composure fractures, when patience turns into fury and the crown itself begins to tremble under the weight of emotion. For King Charles, that moment arrived not with war or scandal, but with the sound of his own son's voice, broadcast, dissected, and played on loop across every screen in Britain. It was the moment he realized the monarchy wasn't just under attack from the outside, it was bleeding from within. For months before his public address, Charles had endured what aides quietly called a siege of humiliation. Every time he turned on the television or scrolled through the morning brief, there it was, Harry's words, Meghan's statements. Another headline reducing the royal family to a soap opera. Each interview carried the same undertone: accusation, resentment, blame. The king's silence, once seen as stoic, began to look like weakness. Privately, he tried to hold the line. "He is my son," he told advisors again and again. "We will not wage war against our own blood." But every time he said it, his resolve weakened just a little more. The palace staff, once deferential to his wishes, began whispering that the king's restraint was costing him authority. Senior courtiers warned that the monarchy's credibility was slipping. "If you won't defend the institution, Your Majesty," one advisor said sharply, "you risk losing it." The breaking point didn't come all at once. It built like pressure beneath a volcano. The trigger, though, was unmistakable. One evening, sitting in his private study at Clarence House, Charles was handed a tablet by his communications secretary. "You should see this," she said quietly. It was a clip from a popular American podcast. Harry's voice filled the room, calm but cutting. "Titles are just words," he said. "They don't define who we are. But when those titles are used to control, to silence, to shape behavior, then they become shackles." Charles froze. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, without looking up, he said, "He's talking about me." "Your Majesty," the aide replied carefully, "he's talking about the system." "The system is me," the king snapped. "And he knows it." He set the tablet down and walked to the window. Outside, the palace gardens were bathed in the orange glow of dusk. For years, he had dreamed of modernizing the monarchy, making it less about ceremony and more about service. He had fought his entire life to be understood, to be respected not as a relic, but as a reformer. And now, his own son had turned him into a villain. The next morning, the king canceled all meetings. For 12 hours, he spoke with no one but his private secretary, Sir Clive Mindham, and his legal counsel. Witnesses said he paced the room relentlessly, muttering under his breath, "He's forgotten what it means. He's forgotten what it costs." By evening, the decision was forming in his mind, not just to respond, but to act. The following day, a closed meeting was held inside Buckingham Palace. It was small, just 7 people: the king, Queen Camilla, Prince Edward, the Archbishop of Canterbury, 2 senior advisors, and the royal legal secretary. No press, no aides. The topic: misuse of royal designations and the preservation of the crown. Camilla sat quietly beside him, her expression unreadable. She had always been Charles's balance, the calm to his chaos, but even she could sense something had shifted. When the king began to speak, his voice was sharper than usual, controlled but seething. "This institution has endured world wars, abdications, assassinations, divorces. But never before," he said, "has it been made a spectacle by its own." He outlined what he saw as the problem: Harry's continued use of the Duke of Sussex title in public endeavors that, to Charles, blurred the line between personal profit and royal representation. The legal secretary presented documents showing how the Sussex brand had been attached to business ventures, production credits, and speaking events. Each instance was underlined in red. Charles stared at the papers in silence for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "This cannot continue." Prince Edward shifted uneasily. "He's your son, Charles. If you strip him of the title, it will be seen as punishment. The people will turn on you." The king's eyes flicked up. "And if I do nothing, they'll say I've surrendered the monarchy to celebrity." There was a long pause. Then the archbishop, ever the voice of diplomacy, spoke. "Perhaps a private letter first, Your Majesty? A warning. A chance for reconciliation." The king shook his head. Reconciliation was offered and rejected. How many chances must a father give before he becomes a fool? Camilla reached over, placing a hand on his wrist. Charles, she whispered, this will hurt you as much as it hurts him. He nodded. It already does. That night, after everyone had left, he sat alone in his study. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the floor. He pulled out a small, worn photograph, him and Diana with a young Harry between them. It was taken at Balmoral, years before everything went wrong. The boy's grin was wide, unguarded, pure. Charles stared at it for a long time. I wanted to be proud of you, he whispered. I still do. Then he set the photo down and picked up a pen. The next morning, a confidential memorandum was drafted. Notification of revocation of designated title use. It was sent for legal review and marked for the king's eyes only. But even kings can't keep secrets forever. Within days, fragments of the plan began leaking to the press. A headline appeared in a London tabloid. King Mull's disciplinary action against Duke of Sussex. The palace refused comment, but the story spread like wildfire. Talk shows speculated, commentators argued, and Buckingham Palace found itself back under siege. That's when Charles did something no one expected. He stopped caring about optics. According to one palace insider, he reached a point where it wasn't about public relations anymore. It was about principle. The king called another meeting, this time without Edward. Only his most trusted aides were present. He ordered them to finalize a public address.